You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost the Field with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Accost the Field. I am Tony Gerdeman, here alongside virtually, I guess, not next to each other, but in spirit. Nah, that's probably not right either. As always, Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Wherever we are, the important thing is we're not in West Lafayette anymore. So, conditions have improved.
Yeah, let's just go right to it, right, Tom? Just dig right in.
Rip that Band-Aid right off.
Yeah. No, nice and peaceful entry. It's like, no, we're going to get right into Purdue. We're not going to spend too much time on Purdue. You can go check back on our instant reaction from the that debacle in West Lafayette. You can go to the ozone.net, and there's the football tab up in the top left. If you mouse over that or click on that brings out another menu, and you go to podcasts. You can go to Accost the Field, and you can go right to our Sunday morning, Saturday night show, Instant Reaction, and get about 45 minutes of Tom. I wouldn't say it was a beaming or positive rendition of this. I mean, it was a good show, but it wasn't overly positive.
Yeah, last week we sort of had resolved to try and be a little bit more positive, but we can only work with the source material that we're given. So at some point, that's not on us.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about when you go to Iowa and lose, when you go to Purdue and lose. Not that that's new for Ohio State. But this is, I blame Urban Meyer in that when he came to the Big Ten, and I wrote this at the time, 2012, he's going to have to bring the rest of the Big Ten, like kicking and screaming, into modern big time football, or he's going to leave them completely behind. He went undefeated his first year, but you've seen after some downtime with Darrell Hazel and Danny Hope that Purdue has bought in. And while we can credit the Big Ten Network and obviously all of the television contracts, Urban Meyer has had a great deal of impact on the entire Big Ten, not just Ohio State. So when you can lose to Michigan State, or you can lose to Purdue or Iowa, like I said, it's not new for Ohio State, but it's the way they are losing and being as good as Ohio State is, as talented as Ohio State is, and losing to these programs is kind of new. And Tom, you can blame Urban Meyer, but I also think you have to in some ways credit him for it as well.
Sure, I guess. I mean, he did kind of drag the Big Ten kicking and screaming into modern football in some ways, and kind of force the level of play up where, at the beginning of his time, you can stay where you are if you want to, Penn State, but you're going to lose 63-14. So if you want that to keep happening, go ahead. And that was sort of a result of sanctions as well. But and Purdue, for example, I mean, yes, it certainly helps that they have decided to actually start spending some of their money. They had been kind of cheap, probably isn't the nicest way to say it, but they had not exactly been throwing around their TV money for quite a while, and then they put money into facilities and decided to spend money on a coach. And hey, look at that! If you decide to invest a little money in your program, sometimes it works out for you. So, yeah, I mean, you can give Urban Meyer a little bit of credit for it, but I'm not sure he's loving how that has worked out for him in the last 7 days or so.
Well, recency bias, I'm guessing. It's not a good time to ask him how he thinks the Big Ten is doing and how he feels about the positive flow that is going on in the conference. Now, every week around this time, we do the best thing and the worst thing we saw from the last game. I don't know what the best thing would be from the Purdue game. I guess for me it would be standing near Tyler Trent, Purdue fan with terminal bone cancer at the end of the game in the corner of the end zone, and just seeing how happy he was, how happy his family was. So I guess that's not football on the field, but it was the best thing that I saw on the field. Tom, I don't know, maybe Terry McLaurin having a run after the catch late in the game. There's nothing.
Art Schleister has been erased from 2 more
There you
lines
go.
in the Ohio State record book, so I'll take that. I mean, another 400-yard performance from Dwayne Haskins, and he's basically doing it at this point with the football equivalent of a gun to his head, where throw the football for 400 yards or else. And even then, it didn't really work on Saturday. But anytime you can get Art Schleister out of the record books, that's always a good thing.
You're right. It was a successful Saturday. Good point. The worst thing, and I don't want to keep harping on the running game, so there's plenty of other worst things. So I will probably go with the red zone offense, which was 0 for 5 on the day in terms of getting touchdowns, 2 for 5. They scored 2 field goals in the red zone, which is a defeat in itself. And the most frustrating aspect of this is that they ran into these same issues in 2015, and back then they had a better offensive line, Ezekiel Elliott, and 2 quarterbacks. And Cardale Jones, while not a mobile guy, was a willing runner, and yet they still had issues, and then had to turn to JT Barrett. Essentially, they would let Cardale get to around the 30 or so before he got benched, and then they would bring JT Barrett in so that he could run the ball and throw it. Right now, they're obviously, they may end up going to Tate Martell a little. I think moving forward, I think what they want to do is changes that don't involve that, and really that's what they should be able to do, changes that don't involve, well, we have to have a running quarterback because that's what this offense is, because we can't do anything else other than have a running quarterback. For me, Tom, that's a defeatist attitude, and it's one where, that requires a lot of head in the sand type of stuff to think that the only way to get this done is to outnumber people with a running quarterback. So for me, that was the worst thing I saw. We can get back to the red zone stuff in a bit if you've got something else that was equally or worse, more terrible.
This is just the same stuff every week. They can't run the ball. The red zone and the short yardage looks inconsistent at best. And the defense is giving up 1 trillion yards again, and big plays, and getting gashed in all the same ways every single week, and nothing changes. Enjoy Arby's. That has been this season in a lot of ways. It's remarkable how they keep throwing rock and get surprised when paper beats it. Like, we're a press man team, rock. We're a press man team, rock. We're going to play our linebackers close to the line of scrimmage, rock. These jerks keep throwing paper. What is going on? Why are we not beating paper? I don't understand. Let's throw rock again. What are the odds it loses to paper again? As soon as the rest of the Big Ten and everyone they've played this year has figured out, hey, paper seems to be working against these guys, and they keep throwing rock. I mean, Urban Meyer on Tuesday during the teleconference basically said, we're going to have to evaluate linebackers playing close to the line of scrimmage. And it's all the stuff that we've been talking about for 2 months now. Like, hey, this is kind of weird and this doesn't seem like it's working. Maybe you should try something else. And good old rock, nothing beats rock except for paper. So, I mean, I feel like this is the same discussion every week. And so now maybe this is the week it changes.
Also on Tuesday's Big Ten teleconference, Jeff Braun, Purdue head coach, said that because Ohio State's linebackers played so close to the line of scrimmage, they knew they could attack them behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties, and you saw that quite a bit. And like you said, opposing coaches, because Ohio State is what they are, then they're able to find the best ways to attack them. And the way Ohio State plays defense, those attacks then become bigger than they would be otherwise because they are so aggressive and there is no last line of defense usually. But I think some of that is going to change in this off week. Before we get too far into Urban Meyer and what he said in the Big Ten teleconference without really saying much other than saying, they're going to look at changes. But news came out on Tuesday that Austin Mack had surgery on a foot injury Monday, left foot. We saw him leave the game in, I believe, the second half of the Purdue game. And Urban Meyer said they hope to have him back for the bowl game. So it's a pretty significant hit for the Buckeyes, not just in the passing game, but also in the running game because he is one of the team's best blockers. So that leaves you with Benjamin Victor as the number one X, who, Tom, we've seen him struggle at times trying to block, and now he's going to be the number one guy there. I think, Jalen Harris came in for Mac. I am wondering, and Urban Meyer said that Blue Smith is close to playing. I'm wondering if maybe they might turn to Paris Campbell, who has played the position before, and they have X's in KJ and CJ Saunders and even DeMario or Jalen Gill. If they use this time to maybe get Paris Campbell acclimated back outside, but he's really never shown the consistency with his hands, although this would be an opportunity for him to do that, which he might be in favor of for NFL purposes. So there's a lot of questions going on at the X receiver, and at least they have some time to try to figure it out. But where are you with this? Do you think like Victor as the number one, the primary run blocker, quote unquote, as the X? Not that he's the primary run blocker, but as the primary X, his run blocking concerns me. And I guess I wouldn't be terribly surprised if maybe they look at Campbell over there.
I would think that Campbell over there would be a much better option in a couple ways. You get Campbell. You talked about Campbell's hands being kind of inconsistent. Ben Victor has not been the most consistent receiver either over the last couple of years. And Urban Meyer talked a couple weeks ago about how Ben Victor had been a reluctant blocker when he got to Ohio State, but had really come along quite a bit in that department. And then Saturday at Purdue, there was one Mike Weber run that I commented on it at the time on Twitter that Weber kind of went off right tackle and Victor made I'll be generous and say it was a half-hearted attempt to block, and his guy got right past him and in on Weber and brought him down. I think you have to think about Campbell just because I think otherwise you're almost punting on the run game. I think you have to get your best run blockers out there. You can't have someone who's not a real willing blocker out there. That's been a deal breaker for other guys in the past, and I would certainly think it would be here. And who have been their best receivers this year? Probably, they've spread the ball around a decent amount, but it seems like Paris Campbell and KJ Hill have been their two best receivers. So if you have an opportunity to get those two guys on the field at the same time, I think that seems like it is something that's at least worth exploring. And, maybe he's just in there sometimes and, you still have to, you're still going to rotate guys there, but they're so deep at H and there's so little depth at X right now that I think you have to think about it.
There was one play where Jalen Harris was in the game and there was a clear miscommunication. Dwayne Haskins threw him the ball and he never stopped to look back for it. So he missed a signal at some point or missed a read in terms of the defense. And granted, there is time now to get him acclimated. I'm sure he's going to get more reps. But I think there's an opportunity here to get more of your best players on the field together. And, losing Mac, they need just more assurances for Dwayne Haskins that he's got guys that he can rely on. But we'll see. And, there's Elijah Gardner as well. But I really don't expect anybody other than Campbell or Jalen Harris to take over there. And Urban Meyer on Tuesday talked about other changes or the fact that this is the time where they can look at schemes and look at bigger changes because you said you can't do it during the season because you're too busy practicing for the opponent. You've got, if you're spending too much time changing things, now you have to practice those things and also practice for the opponent. And he believes there just isn't enough time, even if it's as subtle as, you know what, let's bring the linebackers off of the line of scrimmage.
That doesn't seem like something that should be that complicated. I mean, that you're not installing a whole new defense. You're backing up, and they can still be responsible for the same gaps. It just that does not seem like that should be that much of an adjustment that it's like, whoa, we can't do that midseason. That's just crazy. You've seen them play the linebackers deeper at points this season. It's not like they've been exclusively up on the line. So that certainly sounded, of all the changes, that certainly sounded like the most certain that it was going to happen. But I'm a little unclear on why it took this long for that adjustment to potentially get implemented.
And Urban's exact quote on like the linebackers playing too close to the line of scrimmage was, "We are looking into that." Now, in I guess Greg Schiano's defense, I would say this: it's, you're talking playing on the line of scrimmage versus playing like 4 or 5 yards back. That's 12 to 15 feet. That's a lot of feet, Tom. That's, a big change. Like right now, try doing this podcast from 12 feet away than where you are. You couldn't do it. Could you? You couldn't.
I would have to do a lot of yelling, which is what I think a lot of Ohio State fans have been doing this year, watching the linebackers play close to the line. So it is kind of a smooth, natural transition.
So this being the bye week is an opportunity for the coaches, the assistant coaches, to go out recruiting. Interestingly, though, Urban Meyer has kept the coordinators home, and yesterday he said they spent about 12 hours working on the running game and getting yards when they need them, working on the red zone offense, and defensively working on stopping the big plays. It would seem like stopping the big plays is just a matter of, like we've been talking about, maybe moving the linebackers off a little bit, which that also, I think, puts less pressure on the safeties because they won't necessarily have to be perfect, but they'll still need to be really, really good. But there's a little bit more of a last line of defense than just poor Isaiah Pryor out there. And we'll probably talk about him in a little bit. But those three things, I still think like effort and the run blocking and all of these things need to be an emphasis because they look like they quit against Purdue. They look like they quit against Iowa. I think that needs to be addressed as well. But Tom, is it possible that they, and to use the term quit, some people take offense to that, or in the football terms of, when you see a team quit, you have a pretty good idea that they've quit or they know that there's no hope here. You wonder if there's a frustration with what they're being asked to do, knowing that, it's not going to work because it hasn't worked.
Well, I could certainly see that being the case because it does seem like just about everyone else has figured out that this is not working and there's probably a better way to do it. And I mean, eventually it seems like it probably has filtered to the Ohio State coaching staff that, hey, this it turns out rock is no longer working. So we need to start thinking about developing some sort of a scissors related strategy. I don't know. We'll wait for the bye week. But I mean, I do think I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they quit. Because if you're going to not say that they quit, then they gave up 28 points against Purdue in one quarter, giving their best effort, and that's a whole different problem. I mean, I don't know which one of them is worse. Neither of them is good, but giving up 28 points in a quarter to Purdue is real bad. But I think you did see, let's say, a drop off of intensity and focus in the fourth quarter. On Saturday in West Lafayette. I mean, Urban talked about how you deal with a loss, It depends on the team. If it's a mature team as opposed to immature, that's something I've been working through. And I think there are a lot of indications that this is an immature team. I mean, just the immensely stupid penalties, like immensely stupid. There was a roughing the passer on Draymond Jones that was just like that. I mean, yes, it's frustration, I'm sure, but man, was that a stupid penalty to take. There were some stupid penalties in special teams. There's just a lot of focus penalties on the offensive line, false starts and formation penalties that are. This is not Beaver Stadium where, okay, there's 108,000 people screaming, so yes, you're going to have some false starts because of the noise. Purdue is 60,000 people. Fully a third of them were Ohio State fans. Like if you're getting false start penalties in front of a 40,000 seat stadium, that is a focus issue. That is not it's either a focus issue or a confidence issue where you don't trust yourself to be able to get out of your stance fast enough to block the guy coming off the corner. But there are, I think, a lot of indications that this is not a particularly mature team and maybe has some leadership issues because they're just the mistakes that they're making this late in the season are pretty close to inexcusable to be as penalized as they are and not be getting any better in that and mental mistakes on blown assignments and all that kind of stuff. It just seems like this team has just not been focused, has not been taking care of the very basic ground level stuff you have to do in order to be the kind of team that they want to be.
Terry McLaurin said after the game he thinks they need to get tougher. Jordan Fuller and Urban Meyer said, well, at least the penalties are due to aggressive play. Aggressive is sometimes just another word for foolish or dumb or stupid. And a lot of those penalties, Isaiah Prince had a like false start, maybe had some other things. Draymond Jones with his roughing. Devon Hamilton with his roughing of the punter. These are all guys from the 2015 class, and we wanted to talk about the 2015 class or just the lack of leadership provided by that class. And I wrote about it today that on Tuesday that half of the 26 signees are gone, and so you're left with 13 guys and a handful of maybe half of them are starters and like 4 of those guys are splitting starting time. And Isaiah Prince is the only captain among those guys of what are 4th year guys, and only 4 of the 26, although Jamel Dean did not get in, never played and had to transfer due to injury. But so say 4 of those 25 guys played as true freshmen, which means you've got 21 red shirts and, now most of them are gone. And yet those who remain, they have to pick up the slack left by everybody, like left by the rest of their class. And while you're getting some good play, the leadership is lacking and the production is lacking. Some of the guys in that class, we like AJ Alexander and Grant Schmidt, and just it wasn't as productive. And I noticed like in the 24/7 rankings, the last 6, the lowest ranked of the lowest 6 are still Buckeyes. And I don't know if that is, really means anything, but, if it does, then, you've got 13 of the 26 still at Ohio State, and including the quote unquote worst ones. And they're not the worst ones, but just the lowest ranked guys. So it's a class that Urban Meyer has complained about, would you say, over the years. And we're seeing, I think that's an impact this year, and leadership, production, talent, just not probably his worst class, I think, easily.
And the fact that he's talked about it openly for quite a while gives you an indication that I think he recognizes that it very clearly is the worst class he's brought in. And, like you said, there are certainly redeeming features in there. Draymond Jones has been a fantastic player on the whole, dopey penalty on Saturday or not. he has been, a star player. Isaiah Prince is a captain. Mike Weber has had a great career. I mean, there are certainly bright spots there. Going down to the bottom of the list, I mean, Robert Landers is one of the lowest rated players in that class. Damon Arnett was one of the lowest rated players in those class. They have both had great careers.
Liam McCullough.
Liam McCullough, the best career of all of them.
Right.
There are plenty of guys in that class that have contributed, but this is, in terms of depth and in terms of production, a class where you lose like half of your players. It does a lot like what happened to the basketball program when Thad Matta had that class where all 5 guys were gone in like a year and a half or whatever it was, the Mickey Mitchell class, where he brought in this class and everything looked great, and then all of a sudden, poof, they're gone. And then last year when they needed, they seemed like they were 2 upper class players short of being able to make a real good run, because they should have had 3 or 4 upper class players on that team who were just gone. And you that catches up with you at some point. I mean, it's like when teams have scholarship restrictions, it catches up with you at some point. Look at the places where they're having issues this year, and then look at the results of that 2015 class. I mean, you talked about the leadership, but there's an on-field impact too. I mean, offensive line has been a huge issue this year. You have Matt Burrell, Grant Schmidt, Kevin Fetter all transferred out from that class, and Brandon Bowen has been hurt this year. And Brandon Bowen may come back, and then that helps a lot. But right now, to this point this season, you've gotten production out of 1 out of the 5 players in that class, and that's Isaiah Prince, and he's your starting right tackle, and that's great. But to have 4/5 of that class not work out for various reasons so far this year has been a problem. The linebackers, Jerome Baker's already in the NFL. Justin Hilliard had an injury-plagued career and is, starting to contribute this year, but has not, I think, had the career that most people expected, and that's just due to injuries. Nick Connor had to medically retire because of injuries. Defensive backs, Eric Glover-Williams, Jamel Dean, Joshua Norwood, those guys all didn't work out, and Denzel Ward is like Jerome Baker. He worked out too well, and now he's gone too because he's in the NFL. I mean, quarterback, you'd love to have, the quarterback to run the Urban Meyer offense. Torrance Gibson and Joe Burrow are both in that class. They're both gone, and Joe Burrow is thriving. Torrance Gibson is sort of a unique circumstance, but it sure would be interesting to see what this team looked like with one of them still on this team, and potentially able to give them a running option that perhaps they would trust more than Tate Martell. So I mean, there is that sort of soft factor leadership, but there's also just on-field production too. That all the places you have gaping holes are all the places that class didn't pan out, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
Since you brought Joe Burrow up, and I'm wondering what the Buckeyes' record would be with Joe Burrow as the quarterback. And I believe Dwayne Haskins is a better quarterback, but I also think that Joe Burrow, as we're seeing, is a better fit for the offense, for Urban Meyer's offense as a whole, given that we know now that it's sort of been confirmed that they don't really know how to run the ball with a passing quarterback. And that game at State College would be tough for the Buckeyes, but they've been able to win there before. Do they? Are they 8-0 with Joe Burrow as the quarterback? They'd run the ball better against Purdue. They may not be so frustrated they might not be so frustrated with, because they wouldn't be having problems like they're having now on offense. Joe Burrow doesn't do anything for the defense other than maybe keeps them off the field a little longer. But I guess since it's impossible to prove, I could say, yeah, they're going to be 8-0 with Joe Burrow. But I don't know that I believe that, but I do, Tom, believe that the running game would be more effective. Although with this offensive line, I don't think it would be great.
They're 2-6 with Joe Burrow. Prove me wrong.
All right, next topic.
Next topic, yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that they probably beat Purdue, probably, but they probably lose to Penn State. I mean, I think you're at the same record or perhaps worse with Burrow because he doesn't fix the offensive line problems. He may change how they are able to operate and maybe, running the ball, they're able to run a little better behind the line with kind of the more familiar Urban Meyer offense, maybe. But, unless Joe Burrow goes into the defensive meeting rooms and says, hey, stop throwing rock, you're still having issues on the other side of the ball. So I think that the team looks different with Joe Burrow, but I don't know that the team's record. I don't think the team's record is better, and it could be worse. But I think the same 7-1 is probably about right if it's Burrow instead of Haskins. But it's a very different looking 7-1.
And I don't really know that averaging 4.5 yards per carry, which maybe they get under Joe Burrow, is much better or going to change anything as opposed to the 3 or 3.5 yards per carry they're getting now, because neither is good. And to have a very good to great running game, it takes more than just a quarterback who is a running threat. The offensive line still has to block. And that's still, an issue. And a couple of weeks ago, we were asked, or maybe even a week ago, but a week or two ago, we were asked what kind of personnel changes we might see coming out of the bye week. And the over-under set at that time was 2, which we both went under. But now we should probably revisit that, especially with the thought that maybe Brady Taylor or Brandon Bowen could be back after the bye week. In addition, something needs to change on the interior of the offensive line, in my opinion. And I also think that maybe last week was perhaps the final straw for Isaiah Pryor this year, at least in my mind, but probably not in anybody else, not in anybody on the coaching staff's mind. But are you foreseeing any changes, and what kind of change would you make?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming we're kind of throwing out Austin Mack here because that's not a personnel change. That's just an injury. And similarly, like, okay, Damon Arnett's back probably, but that's not really. So, I mean, just in terms of a pure production change, I think you're looking at offensive line, maybe at the Mike backer, maybe Baron Browning goes in and replaces Tough Borland, maybe. I mean, Browning had moments where he looked pretty good on Saturday, but I don't know that they'll think of that as a complete change because they've kind of been playing situationally anyway. So, yeah, and offensive line, that strong safety position, I think those are certainly the places I would think, and I would probably still. I mean, if 2 is the line, I would at most say it's going to be a push and probably still an under. I think you're probably still going to see Isaiah Pryor back at strong safety, and you're probably going to, the most likely place for a change is on that offensive line with like a Brady Taylor playing at center and slide Michael Jordan back to left guard or something like that. But, I mean, any of those spots is a possibility, but I don't know that I would count any of them as so likely that, if you count each of those changes as a half, I don't think it adds up to 2.
And like we've said before, I don't know that Brandon Bowen or Brady Taylor can come back right away and start. Demetrius Knox is getting pushed around quite a bit. So we talked about, moving Michael Jordan to left guard and getting, Brady Taylor or Josh Myers in there. But it's not like right guard has been outstanding this year. None of the interior, I mean, as much as they're running between the tackles, there is no room there. So I don't think anybody has solidified their spot. While Michael Jordan isn't going to leave, one of those 3 spots, I don't think Demetrius Knox is just, should be ignored as well. And Urban Meyer's talked about Wyatt Davis has been close. Josh Myers is known as a run blocker. I wouldn't mind seeing Myers at center, Jordan at left guard, Wyatt Davis at right guard. Just, you have to try something. And I'm sure they will be trying stuff this next week, and maybe that lights a fire under these interior guys that to know that actually my job is kind of on the line. Demetrius Knox really was a battlefield promotion last year, was really only competing against redshirt freshmen in the spring and in the summer. So he's never really had like a full-fledged competition or never won one. You know, he's had plenty and lost them. Lost them to Michael Jordan in 2016, lost to Brandon Bowen last year. So I think it would help him to be pushed or to see like, this does not belong to you. And this is not a permanent thing. This is temporary. And if you want to keep it, you have to play much better. We can't keep looking at the running game and seeing you on your back on plays where a guy is getting tackled 1 or 2 yards downfield. In terms of, you know, linebacker, I'm all for getting Baron Browning and more. I wonder if you move Tuff Borland further back, is that good for him? The safety situation, I think it's time to try Shaun Wade finally, whether that's free safety, which might be a better position. But even, you know, he's had his struggles with the slants himself, so maybe it's best just to keep him as a strong safety, and hopefully he gets his angles better than Isaiah Pryor. But I don't see all of those happening, so I would continue to either go under or push. And just because we see how stubborn the staff can be, I'm still going to go under, but it should go over, in my opinion. Like, if they want to, and not that Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis would fix something, but it would be something, you know. So maybe they try it in practice and it doesn't work out as well, but it still forces everybody else to get better. Then, you know, that would be a net positive. So yeah, I'm going to go under. Just, you know, they're so change is so bad. You know, we can't even move linebackers 3 yards back, so don't expect to actually replace people. That would be insane. And then also, Tom, if you're going to replace a linebacker, I still don't really have faith that anybody else is going to come in and be better, simply because of how we've seen them struggle over the last 2 seasons.
Right. The fact that no one has separated themselves in that linebacker group, and the guys who have played have all been kind of meh. I think that sort of by the transitive property, you can sort of figure out that everyone else has kind of been meh in practice as well. And I mean, just go back to August when we were getting no communication and no insight at all into the Ohio State program. And Ryan Day had that one Friday, I think, when he just put out a letter that was kind of, okay, here's an update on all the positions. And all the positions were, everything is great, everything is awesome, these guys are doing fantastic. And the linebackers are like, well, they're working, and it's a process. They're still battling. And based on what we've seen the last 8 weeks, if, you know, all of fall camp was, yeah, I don't know, and these are the guys who won, then the guys who didn't win are probably, you know, not magically going to be way better. But there does come a point when you just kind of have to try something else, because, you know, at some point it's just not working. And so with the linebackers, I would be more than willing to just let's try putting them back off the line a little bit and see if that fixes some of the issues, because this was not, I mean, the linebackers were not great last year, but and they have had some of the same issues with overrunning plays and all that kind of stuff, even with different people being there. So there may be some staff issue there as well. But I would be willing to let them try a positional change just in terms of where they are on the field, and before you do a personnel change there. The offensive line, I think, of anywhere, I mean, safety, you can certainly make the argument, but on the offensive line, like it's just not working, so maybe it's time to try something else. And, you know, I mean, you mentioned Demetrius Knox. Brandon Bowen was the right guard last year. if Brandon Bowen is healthy, it's certainly and is, we don't know exactly what his conditioning's like,
Yeah.
what his strength is like right now after coming off of that leg injury. If he is close to where he was last year, I'd give him a shot at right guard. And then I think you either, some combination of Josh Myers, Wyatt Davis, Brady Taylor, Michael Jordan for that left guard and center spot. It either gives you just a different look at try something new. But it also sets you up better for next year because Demetrius Knox and Malcolm Pridgeon are both gone after this year, correct? I don't have a roster in front of me. Am I remembering that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So you're losing both of the guys who are your starting guards this year. Neither of them have performed particularly well. So maybe it's worth, unless you see a major leap forward from one or both of those guys, it may be time to just try something else because it's not working and it's getting late pretty early right now.
What's the worst that can happen? They average 3 yards per carry if they try new offensive linemen.
Sadly, that would be an improvement over some recent games.
When you're up to 3 yards per carry, yeah, that's not great. The linebackers, seeing like James Laurinaitis and Andrew Sweat, former Buckeye linebackers, tweeting about their frustration with having the linebackers on the line of scrimmage tells you just how much they would hate to play in Greg Schiano's defense because the way they're talking, like they're immediately hamstrung based on, just already being in the scrum and not being able to, like, if you read something, that's great. Doesn't mean you can get over there because now you've got 3 offensive linemen and 2 defensive tackles in front of you or next to you rather than you're behind everybody. So I do think just doing that will help. But we still saw Malik Harrison making plays on the football last week and missing tackles. So there's still not, that won't be the fix. It will be, I guess maybe like if we're talking plumbing, it would be like, it would be a washcloth like around a leaky pipe, but it wouldn't be the wrench that actually, tightens up the pipe itself and keeps it from leaking. So, when Malik Harrison is maybe your best linebacker and is making that many mistakes, and Pete Werner has had his issues, and Tuff Borland has had his issues, moving them back is going to be, I think, good. But now they have to do something that they haven't done exceedingly well this season, and that's tackle guys. But at this point, if they just slow them down for somebody else, that would be an improvement. And really, if they could just occupy space, how many times, Tom, have we seen running backs or quarterbacks break into an area and there's nobody within 15 or 20 yards, and that's because the linebackers are on the line of scrimmage and nobody is behind them. So if they can just occupy more space by being free of the offensive line, I think that will make a difference in giving up some of the big plays. Then they just have to execute, and they have to execute a lot better than they have to this point this season.
And I think you can improve at this point from one of the most embarrassing defenses in school history to just kind of maybe almost okay, and it would be it would have a huge impact on the on-field product. Just even if they're just speed bumps out there to slow the other team down a little bit, that keeps some of the big plays from, turning into 80-yard plays. Probably makes Isaiah Pryor look a little better behind them. I mean, there's a whole bunch of cascade effects here that I think that a small change like that may help. Now, I mean, as far as Malik Harrison, and I would agree with your assessment that he is arguably the best linebacker on this team right now. The fact that he's arguably the best linebacker on this team right now, and you also can lay some, significant criticisms on him in terms of sometimes overrunning plays, not being a consistent tackler at all. And the fact that you've had these issues now for 2 years, I mean, there's only one consistent thread there. And I wrote something somewhat unkind this week about that consistent thread. So you are going to have some real big boy talks at the end of this year about maybe things that aren't working out real well on the coaching staff and position coaches that maybe weren't the best fits in retrospect, having coached 20 straight years in the NFL and not having coached in college at all except for 1 year as a grad assistant at Michigan State in 1991. And there's probably worth a little bit of conversation about how that decision got reached and maybe how the hiring process might be improved in the future so that that type of mistake doesn't happen again. But I mean, there have been very consistent issues at certain spots for a couple of years, and my general philosophy is you give a guy a year and you kind of have a free pass for a year that you can't necessarily judge someone in their first season. You give them a year, see how it goes, see if things have get better in that second year. Because a lot of times it does take just that first year of adjustment and teaching and coaching to see the improvement, pay off down the line. I mean, just in general with all coaches. I mean, look at Jim Tressel's first year at Ohio State. They were awful. And then the second year it pays off. Urban Meyer at Florida had a bad first year, and his second year pays off. That is I think a good rule of thumb. You don't judge someone on the first year, you give them a second year, and that's true of head coaches, coordinators, position coaches. This is the second year for Bill Davis. Things are not better. This is still, all of the same issues are still issues. So it's probably time to revisit that at the end of the season, and if there might be another change that needs to be made there.
I think we would be surprised if there are no changes. I would be surprised if there are no changes with the coaching staff whenever they have these flameouts. Something happens, something changes. Now, I wonder if they lose to Michigan, then things have to change. And it no longer becomes like voluntary on Urban Meyer's part. It becomes like mandatory that this happened because of the coaching staff. You can't let it happen again, just like the 31-0 to Clemson. So this week, and I'll write about this at some point, maybe on Wednesday. Like right now, I think Ohio State's focus should be this week. Part of the focus should be like, how do we devise, if we're changing things, how do we devise them to best beat Michigan's defense? And if you can beat Michigan's defense, then you can handle Michigan State's defense. You can handle Maryland's defense. You may be able to handle Nebraska's defense. That should be the focus right now, except they're not good enough to look that far ahead. But however they can make Michigan's defense a priority, I think would help them in the long run, because if they're not thinking ahead about that, they're going to run into something that they can't handle. And I know they probably think, well, as long as we get the running game fixed, and that's what we're working on right now, I don't know that that's going to be enough. And I think they should focus more on Michigan perhaps and this time, but I don't see them doing it. I just see them, Tom, working on themselves, and then when Michigan week comes, they'll worry about Michigan.
I'm sure that they are at least thinking about it through that prism a little bit. And of all the things that I think they need to fix to beat Michigan, I think the running game is the first thing on that list. There are probably other things you need to fix. I think Shea Patterson would probably look at this defense and go,
yes,
rub his hands together and tent his fingers, and do the Mr. Burns excellent. But you are not going to beat Michigan, especially this iteration of Michigan, with the corners they have. You are not going to beat this Michigan team throwing the ball. You have to run the ball, and that has been a recurring theme in this series forever. But it is especially true this year. This is not a team that they're going to be able to throw for 450 yards on because the Michigan corners they're too good. You're not going to, the Ohio State receivers are not going to get open often enough to throw for 450 yards. So you're going to have to run the ball to beat Michigan. And that probably involves some changes on the offensive line. That probably involves some changes in, you're going to have to seriously consider some changes at quarterback. Not all the time. You're not going to pull Dwayne Haskins off as the starter. I think you have to either have we've talked about the Weber, Dobbins, run the Wildcat read option kind of thing with them. I think you have to think about that, or you have to think about Tate Martell. They have to change something. The offensive line, you're going to have personnel changes on the offensive line at some point, and you're going to have to figure out how to run the ball. And what they're doing right now is clearly just not working, and a lot of it's offensive line, but they have to figure out a way to run the ball without having a running quarterback, or they have to have a running quarterback in there. Those are your options, and whichever one it is, Godspeed, but you're going to have to pick one. So figure it out.
My thought is if they decide that they're going to fix the running game with a Wildcat or with Tate Martell here and there, then they've already lost. They need to figure out how to run the ball with this offensive line and a drop back quarterback. We see it happen all over the nation, and other teams can run the ball. And that's why I'm wondering, did Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day, not have a complete understanding of Urban Meyer's offense to think that they could run the ball without a running quarterback? And Kevin Wilson has been able to do it at Oklahoma and Northwestern here and there, and Indiana as well. I don't know, how well Ryan Day's running games have gone at places he's been, but it's almost like they, I don't know, maybe bit off more than they could chew, or they didn't understand that what Urban Meyer's offense does not suit a passing quarterback or a non-running quarterback. And that's why I've said before, this isn't Dwayne Haskins' fault. This is Urban Meyer's fault that his offense has trouble running the ball with a quarterback who is only just, the most prolific quarterback in Ohio State history. It's almost a waste at this point. I've had people ask me, won't this dissuade other passing quarterbacks from coming to Ohio State? I don't think it will, because those guys can run. Jack Miller can run, Matthew Baldwin can run, Dwan Mathis can run. For me, and I don't know this to be true, but I'll certainly speculate on it and share it with you here, Tom. For me, Dwayne Haskins, it seems like a guy, and we've seen video of it, he is this quarterback project from not quite birth, but 8 or 9 years old, where his entire life has been quarterback gurus, dropping back mechanics, and throwing here, throwing there, and it hasn't really been just being an athlete, being a kid, playing sports. We watch him when he tries to slide, and it's like he's never slid in his life. His whole entire life has just been dropping back and throwing. It's never been, running in the playground or playing basketball or playing baseball or, Frisbee or whatever. It's just always been, I am a quarterback, I am a passer. And how many times have we seen when he takes off running? Even my sister-in-law the other day was when they were at the 7-yard line or whatever, and he starts to take off, and these are things that are most quarterbacks could run on, but she's does he even know how to run? And I'm yes, he physiologically he knows how to do it, and I'm sure he can. It never looks natural. The only thing he looks natural at is throwing the ball. Running the ball, it all looks like it's delayed reaction, and he's not comfortable with it. I know he says he'll run it if he has to, but you can see why they don't ask him, Tom.
What I don't understand is if you go back and look at the Michigan game last year, that first drive where, he completes that 3rd and 16 or whatever it was, pass to Austin Mack. A play or two later, he has that scramble off right tackle where Rashawn Gary's chasing him, and he gets down to like the 1 yard line and like dives to the pylon. Watch that run, and then try and think: have you seen him run like that at any point this season? I don't know what the difference is between then and now, but he doesn't look like the same player running. So I don't know whether they, have told him this year, hey, whatever you do, be careful, don't get hit, we can't afford to lose you. And he's just being extra super careful and trying to get down to the ground as fast as he can. And they just forgot to tell him last year, so he just kind of went YOLO. But he last year, you saw him run and it was like, whoa, if this guy can run and throw like this, that's going to be an incredible weapon. And then all of a sudden this year, he just looks like Quap when he's trying to run. So there was that play towards the end of the game at Purdue where he scrambled up the middle and sort of tried to slide and like stuck his knee into the ground and like tumbled over. And you literally heard the crowd laughing. Like, what is this dude's deal? I don't know what has happened. I don't know if he's nursing some kind of an injury or he's just not comfortable, or they have just told him to be so careful that it's gotten in his head, or he just doesn't want to get hurt because he knows he could make a whole lot of money if he stays healthy for the next 4 months. I don't know, but he doesn't look like the same runner that we saw in Ann Arbor last November.
Maybe last year was adrenaline as well, and simply like, you have to get this done, and you're not necessarily thinking where this year he's the guy and he's the man. And but it's bizarre to see the complete change. And it's also odd that they haven't run a single quarterback power, unless like you said, and I think there is truth to it, that they don't want him getting hurt, obviously. And they don't want to put his head in there and have him fight for those yards. But I also think it's because they've seen him try and he doesn't do it very well in practice. So it's like, what's the point? Although they still run the ball with their running backs, and what's the point there anyway? But let's digress. The last thing I wanted to do today is rank Urban Meyer's Ohio State teams from best to worst. And this is a ranking of like who you think you would win if the two teams played. Because what I did is my rankings is things are not getting better for the Urban Meyer Ohio State program in terms of, at least in my opinion, of his best teams. And Tom, I don't know what your rankings are, and I don't even know how we should reveal this, but I think one for me is the national championship team, 2014 team. How can you argue with that? Number two for me is the 2013 team, which could run on anybody. And like when I look at the rest of Urban Meyer's teams here, I think they could run on those teams too. Who do you have at 1 and 2?
See, I thought we were going to be right in line with each other, and we started out that way and then diverged very strongly. I started with 2014. I mean, I'm going based on the team they were at the end of the season, because if you're looking at the team in September, then the 2014 team is close to the bottom because they were awful at the beginning of the year. But end of the year, Big Ten championship, postseason, I think 2014 is unquestionably number one. Number two, I went with 2015. I mean, just that it was so loaded with talent on both sides of the ball, and they just kind of dragged ass all season. But once they lost that Michigan State game, they kicked it into gear, and they just absolutely beat Michigan to a pulp, and then just absolutely drubbed Notre Dame. I mean, the Notre Dame game, I think the score ended up looking a little closer than that game was. But, I mean, to end the season the way they did that year, my issue with the 2013 team, and we'll get to them eventually, but not for a while, that 2013 team, that defense at the end of the year was garbage. As soon as Christian Bryant went out, there was no answer on the back end of that defense, and they got gashed by Michigan, they got gashed by Michigan State, they got gashed by Clemson. I can't. That is the only defense that is even in the conversation with this year's team for the worst defenses of the Ohio State Urban Meyer era, I think. And even then, that was only kind of at the end of the year. At the beginning of the year, sure, I think that was a very good team. But as soon as Christian Bryant went out, that team kind of fell apart on defense.
Well, that's why when I have him in my rankings, he's definitely healthy. Because no, you're right. It was like, imagine this defense. Imagine that the 2013 without Christian Bryant, like trying to defend any of these Ohio State offenses. But for me, I have him in there in the running game with Carlos Hyde and Braxton Miller. And the 2015 team, I guess I don't know if I'm angry at it or just like I can't, because you are not alone in putting them second. I asked the same thing on the Ozone message board, and they were the most popular second team, if I recall. But for me, just the way they came into the season, they were fat and happy. They were sluggish throughout the season, and they finished very well. But I can't get the first 8 or 9, 10 games out of my head. Even JT Barrett had his misstep there as well. So that's why for me, I have them way below their talent level. I don't think they played up to their talent level until the end. But the number 3 team for me was Urban Meyer's only undefeated team. And I think I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just biased to the old ways, because that was not a great defense either. It wasn't a great passing game. But they won every game, and they never got blown out at Iowa. They never got blown out by Clemson. They never got blown out by Purdue. And I don't think they were the most talented team, or maybe even the third most talented team, although they did have some pretty impressive defensive linemen. And you have Devin Smith, you've got Ryan Shazier, you've got all of these different guys. So that's my number 3 team. Who do you have there?
See, I had 2012 very high the first time I did this list, because I ranked them, and then I asked you, hey, did you mean to do this like in terms of what they achieved or how they would fare if they went head to head? So the first time I did it, when it was what they achieved, I had them second on the list. For me, for third on this list, if you're going, how was this team at the end of the season? I've got 2017, because the defense is really strong. The offense was not great, but the offense was solid. They were good on both sides of the ball. They were a very solid team. I have them 3, and I've got 2016's team 4, because that team was not great at the end of the season, and obviously the Clemson game was a disaster, but they beat a very, very, very good Michigan team at the end of that season. And that's kind of gets forgotten a little bit now, just because of how bad that Clemson loss was. But I have them ahead of 2012, just because I think 2012, just the raw talent just isn't there on that 2012 team. I think the coaching staff was probably better in 2012 than it was in 2016. I mean, that probably isn't much of a hot take, but just the raw talent on the team, I think 2016 ultimately wins out. That 2012 team, it was undefeated. It was a really interesting season to watch them just kind of cobble stuff together and figure it out and find a way to win every week. But just in terms of sheer raw talent, I don't think that team stacks up. And I mean, as we talked about before, the Big Ten of 2012 was not as competitive as the Big Ten of 2018. I don't think that 2012 team goes undefeated if you put them in the 2018 Big Ten.
All right. Yeah, and I do, like, I don't have a disagreement with somebody wanting to put 16 or 17 above them. And for me, the 2016 team, I had 4 as well, and then 2015 at 5, 2017, and then 2018. And maybe this is just me being, like, I don't know if I'm just like the grumpy old man now with these newfangled Buckeyes, but when you see them losing and getting blown out, I think that sticks with me. and it's something that we haven't seen from Urban Meyer's earlier teams, and you didn't really know it was possible until you start seeing it. And then, so yeah, I had 2014 number 1, 2013 number 2, 2012, knowing that 13 and 12 other people are not going to have as high as me, but I like the running game, and I like that they did not quit, and that was something that the 2012 team was special doing. And had Gene Smith properly not gone to a bowl game in 2011, you're looking at a possible national champion in 2012 as well. And Tom, would you still then have them as lowly ranked as you do, knowing that it's the same exact team, and probably would still not go undefeated in the 2018 Big Ten schedule?
I mean, in the list of best seasons, most high achieving seasons, I had them second because, I mean, like you said, they are. I mean, people will look at that 2012 season now and think, well, I mean, they would have gotten killed by Alabama, but they wouldn't have played Alabama if they had gone to the national championship game. That would have been Ohio State and Notre Dame, and that was the Manti Te'o distraction Notre Dame team that came out and just got absolutely throttled by Alabama. So, yeah, I mean, I think, and the Big Ten championship game that year would have been against, who was it, Nebraska? Yeah, it was Nebraska, who gave up 70 points to Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game to a 5-loss Nebraska, a 5-loss Wisconsin team hung 70 on Nebraska. So yes, Ohio State would have beaten Nebraska. Yes, Ohio State would have had an extremely good chance to beat Notre Dame in that national championship game. So to answer your question, yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Point for Townie. So then, who are your bottom two then? After
2012, I went 2013 for all the reasons we talked about. Just after that Christian Bryant injury, it was just not a championship caliber defense. And then right now, I mean, I've got 2018 there because I'm going based on end of the season, which the last impression we had of the 2018 team was not great. So, that this could end up significantly higher if they can get their, get themselves focused, pull themselves together, get some of the issues solved. You figure out the run game. You improve the defense. The defense does not have to be lights out. This does not have to be a 2002 defense. This just has to be a competent Ohio State defense that is not 128th and 120th and 116th in the country and all these different advanced stats. They just have to be competent, which certainly seems like it's possible with some changes that are doable. You don't have to completely overhaul everything. There are doable, feasible changes that could improve this team dramatically, just from absolutely putrid to just okay. And then all of a sudden you have a pretty good chance of winning out. But you have to figure out how to run the ball, and you have to figure out how to stop people every once in a while. So if they can do that, they could move up this list pretty far, because there is a lot of raw talent on this team. And if they can kind of get some of the schematic stuff figured out, they could move ahead of 2013 for sure. Maybe 2012, maybe 2016. I mean, if they kick it into gear like they did in 2015 after the Michigan State loss, or as they did in the last 3 games of 2014, then yeah, you could finish real high on this list. But they're grading an incomplete for me right now. But there is a pretty wide delta on how this season could finish.
I agree, Tom. Their playoff chances are still very much alive, and are they're almost a sure thing as long as they win out to make the playoffs. So that's a good point by you.
R.I.P. my mentions. It was like a conga line of people on the weekly college football playoff picture. Just a conga line of people waiting to tell me that this is not a college football playoff team. Which, I mean, you can debate the quality of the team all you want, but realistically, if this team wins out, they beat Michigan State, they beat Michigan, they win the Big Ten championship game. More likely than not, they are going to the college football playoff. Now, I mean, you can debate how likely it is that they'll actually do all those things, but
right.
If Alabama and Clemson and I don't know who else, Oklahoma and Notre Dame all win out, then nope, they won't make it. But if you've watched college football for more than 3 weeks, you know the odds of those 4 teams all winning out are not that great because college football is crazy and unpredictable, and there's probably a better odds that 2 of those teams don't make it than that all 4 of those teams do. So if Ohio State wins out, they probably are in the college football playoff, but they've got a lot of stuff to sort out in order to get to that point.
And keep in mind, the Pac-12 is essentially out. Washington State is like the only one loss team left, so they're not necessarily out, but they're out. Maryland has that win over Texas. Texas has that win over Oklahoma. So there is a glimmer of hope for Buckeye fans, even if Texas or Oklahoma and Ohio State end up with the same record. A weak Big Ten team beat your best team, and Ohio State, in theory, then beats that Maryland team. So you've got that bit of an advantage for Ohio State as well. The ranking of the teams I thought was a good exercise, just because I wanted to see if I was alone in my thinking that things are getting worse. And I don't know if I'm alone, but you certainly have a different perspective, which is not different than a lot of the others on the message board. So if you're listening now and you want to throw your rankings in, you can do it on the post on this podcast on the Ozone, or leave it in some comments, or email us, or tweet us just to give your thoughts. And if you think like me, it would be great for me to know that I'm not alone, and that I'm not some outcast pariah thinking that, Ohio State was only good way back when, and now these millennials on this Buckeye team now don't know what it takes to win, and that's why they keep getting blown out by bad teams. But Tom, so you are in favor of the millennials. You don't think they're ruining Ohio State football?
Let's not say something we can't take back. All right, that's not. I think we all know my position on millennials and the kids today with their baggy jeans.
All right, you know what? That's actually I think that's gonna wrap it up for us today. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode and past episodes, and also thank you for listening to future episodes. Make sure to check out all of these shows on the Ozone Radio Network. Starts on Monday with the Sloopcast, Tuesday with the Silver Bullets podcast, Wednesday you've got us, Thursday you've got Sons of Schmidt, Friday you've got another edition of the Sloopcast, and then you've got us after the game, Saturday night, Sunday morning, depending on kickoff. Tom, I don't believe there will be a post-game instant reaction show this week. Is that correct?
I mean, we could just pick a random game and do it. It's and I don't know who Eastern Michigan is playing this week, but since we're using the transitive property with Maryland to get Ohio State in, I think Eastern Michigan has to be considered at least some kind of a playoff contender at this point, since they beat Purdue. So maybe we just do a post-game show for the Eastern Michigan whoever game this weekend.
I don't want to do that. No, I'm going to
okay,
pass.
Then, well, fine. Well, listeners, I was going to do it for you, but if Gerd's not going to do it, that's fine. You know who to leave me a 5-star review and get really profane in his mentions on Twitter.
Maybe we could do a live show, which we're eventually going to start working on it and finding some way to do some live shows, be it after the games and broadcast everything. Just put it all out there right at once for everybody. We'll need to find something better than Eastern Michigan. No offense to the Eagles.
Good job. You did it. Yay, Gerd did it.
So thank you all for listening. We will talk to you later next week, or maybe even this weekend if we can find a good MAC game to talk about.
Well, she threw